Hey folks, it's Nate. Thanks for joining me at the art table again today. Today's video was inspired by the lovely Melon T. The specific video she did that inspired this is linked down below. And if you're interested in the full context of what I want to talk about here, I would recommend viewing it first. It's an excellent video looking at the way the Marines are presented as a source of authority and justice in the One Piece world. I really enjoyed that video. I found it to be very thoughtful and very measured. Ultimately, I agree with the notion that she puts forward that Oda is less concerned with critiquing the world government and the people that make it up more broadly, and more interested in the individuals and the way they behave with the positions they've been entrusted with. I also think that is primarily the point that he's trying to make. However, she also presents the Marines and the world government as a system, and the pirates as a group of people who seek freedom but have no system. And while that's understandable, especially if you look at these concepts from a Western point of view, I think it's missing a layer of analysis that comes when you look at it from more of an Eastern holistic point of view. Now, I'm not an expert on any of this stuff. I just have read a decent amount of philosophy, although it has been a while, and I'm going to try in my own way to articulate some of the thoughts I've had as I read One Piece. Namely that Marines and pirates are actually part of a unified system that Oda is exploring. And I'm not just talking about the ends of a pole or the yin and the yang, although that is certainly an aspect of what happens between Marines and pirates. And I will be discussing that in just a moment. There is also an element here of the rise and fall of a nation that we are watching play out. That nation is, of course, the world government. A titanic world-spanning government, sure, but the themes playing out here are really based on the way governments in Japan, and to a lesser extent, the way governments in China, which is a cultural touchstone for many of the nations in Southeast Asia, tend to rise and fall. See, the world government is a government that spans the entire world, but you have to understand that to the people of ancient China and ancient Japan, their nations also span the whole world. These were not places like the middle of Central Europe, where all different kinds of ethnic groups and language groups and people groups were constantly moving back and forth and fighting over territory. They were fairly self-contained due to very advantageous geological features. And so they tended to have a government that rose to power and just stayed in power until corruption overthrew it. You can see this with the rise of the shogunate in the Sengoku period, the eventual fall of the shogunate during the Bakumatsu, and of course, the entire history of the dynasties of China since the unification of the country. So, I'm going to give you the bird's eye view, because the specifics of the way this general pattern play out vary from iteration to iteration, which is in and of itself one of the ways that Japan and China tend to look at this rise and fall of governments. But the basic concept is a wise ruler raises himself up, assumes a position of power, runs the nation for a while, effectively running the world for a while, and because he is a wise ruler, he builds a nation that runs pretty well. His wisdom and the wisdom of his subordinates keep it on path. Then corruption creeps in. Maybe the wise ruler dies, and the person who replaces him is not as good. Or several generations pass, and the same kind of moral decay takes place. Perhaps the wise ruler falls into foolishness. He is deceived, or he's led astray, or he just loses wisdom as he ages. Whatever happens, the control of the nation begins to fade, things begin to fall into chaos. Perhaps some of his wise subordinates break off and form their own factions, or other factions rise up, and the situation becomes very chaotic. There is no longer wise leadership. The general populace doesn't know what's going to happen. They become very fearful and afraid. Wars begin to break out as these powerful factions begin to bounce off one another, seeking what is best for them rather than what is best for the nation as a whole. And eventually, one of two things happens. A powerful new wise ruler rises up and overthrows the existing government, or a powerful wise member of the existing government manages to seize enough influence and authority to reunite the nation, and they continue for a while longer. Either way, this system persists because a wise and enlightened ruler comes to power again. Now that's a very, very high-level look at this basic cycle of history as it is seen in parts of the East. And if you want more of an in-depth examination of that cycle of history, and really in the form of an interesting and engaging story rather than just a brief thumbnail overview in a YouTube video, I actually highly recommend the series 12 Kingdoms. It is a series of, I believe, 8 novels, only 4 of which I think are published in English, or there is an anime adaptation of the first 2 or 3 novels. Last I checked, that was available on Crunchyroll. I can't speak to the quality of the anime, I've only read some of the books, but it does take a very interesting and deep look at this idea of governance. But that's really not what I'm here for right now. So if you're watching this, you're probably a weeb, and you may enjoy getting more about it in that format rather than listening to me ramble. You're here for One Piece, after all. And speaking of One Piece, what do we see in the world government? Well, there's a lot of chaos in this supposedly unified world government. If you look at the symbol of the world government, it's very interesting because it's shown as a cross with 5 points on it. Now, reasonably, that could be interpreted as a reference to the 5 elder planets, who are, of course, the supreme authority in the world government. However, it also, interestingly enough, hints at something else, namely that the world government itself consists of 5 different factions that uphold its power and authority. The first faction is, of course, the Marines, which are under the command of Fleet Admiral Sengoku at the beginning of the series, and later Fleet Admiral Sakazuki. That's the one everyone thinks of for very good reason. It is the most public-facing arm of the world government. It's the one that goes out and does all the heavy-handed stuff that uphold the government in its legitimacy, and most notably, puts down pirates. More on that in a bit. The second branch of the world government is the Cipher Pol system, the undercover agents who take care of all the clandestine work that the world government would rather not be tied back to them. The fourth arm is the Seven Warlords of the Sea, a special organization built by the world government to function basically as a reserve arm. They're privateers in the most classic sense of the term. They can get away with doing whatever they want to people who aren't members of the world government, but they aren't always at the beck and call of the world government the way, say, a Marine base would be. Sure, occasionally they have to show up and do things that the elders demand of them, but it's a lot different from being a Marine. The fourth arm of the world government is the regional rulers. Be it Alabasta, Goa, or Sakura Kingdom, ultimately, the rulers are a part of the world government. They are in touch with the leaders of that government. They have to consider the political ramifications of their actions in the context of the world government. Sure, technically, they are the ruler of their nation, but they are also a member of the world government, and the world government can make demands of them, just as they can, in turn, take part in revelry and kind of set the agenda for the world government, at least a tiny bit. You know, depending on how much the 5 elders let them get away with. Which brings me to that fifth branch of the government, that center in the cross, which is, of course, the 5 elder planets and Imu, who hides behind them. So with this structure right away, we see that the world government does fit the mold of this very corrupt nation as we see in the cycle of nations in the Far East. The 5 elders are originally pitched to us as wise rulers. The first time you see them in chapter 200 and something, they really look dignified and insightful. Leaders who have a strong handle on the way men think and act and behave, and are ready to respond to it in a manner that promotes the growth of the nation. However, the 5 elder planets are not the rulers of the world government. Imu is. And he or she is a coward who does not show their face or take part in governing the nation at all. That is a perfect recipe for a corrupt nation. And all throughout One Piece, we do see the signs that the systems of this nation are at war with each other. 2 of the 7 warlords are scheming against the world government. Crocodile wants to set up his own nation, and Doflamingo is conspiring with one of the 4 pirate emperors, a force opposed to the world government. The Navy thinks the 7 warlords are an abomination. Steri, the current king of the Goa Kingdom, wants to sit in the empty throne on Mary Joie. And something tells me he's not the only one of these lesser kings that wouldn't mind sitting in Imu's seat. And according to the most recent SBS in Volume 109, apparently, the Cypherpole agencies even attempted to overthrow the world government behind the scenes. There haven't been any direct signs of that in the primary narrative, other than this is apparently how Rob Lucci and the rest of CP9 made it to CP0. The point is, Oda is thinking of the world government as this failing and corrupt government. And in the cycle of nations, this is the kind of thing you see as a government begins to fail. Now, it's possible that some charismatic figure is going to step into that gap and reunite the world government into a functioning system again, but it's also possible that some other system is going to raise itself up and take over, because that is the way the cycle of nations works. And we have seen that over the course of One Piece. We have seen that there is an army directly seeking to overthrow the world government, led of course by Dragon, but there are also a bunch of pirates, and these pirates are also a nation. And I'm not just saying that pirates have a titular king. No, pirates have towns scattered around the world. They have an island known as Fulalet. The most powerful of them control territory, collect tributes, and levy huge navies. These are, of course, the Four Emperors. But most of all, pirates have a flag and a code. This flag and this code represent what it means to raise up a new nation, whereas the code and flag of the Marines represent what it is to be an existing government. The flag of the Marines is a seagull. The seagull flies over the seas and looks down until it spots refuse, and then it swoops down and it cleans it up. This is reflected in the creed of the Marines, which is, of course, justice. The Marines are not an inflexible organization. Every man has his own justice, after all, and they must seek it in the ways they see fit. There are a wide variety of ideals about justice in the Marines, just among the admirals, to say nothing of the rank and file. The problem is that you cannot dispense justice without first removing yourself from the things around you and looking down on things from on high, which leaves you dangerously detached. Is it any wonder, then, that the regular people of the One Piece world look at Marines with so much fear? On the other hand, the creed of the pirate is freedom. Luffy says to be the Pirate King is to be the most free. However, at the same time, to be a pirate is to be willing to risk your life. And the symbol of that is in the Jolly Roger, which is in and of itself a memento mori, a reminder that one day you will die. Now, there are, to my knowledge, only two groups of pirates that don't use a Jolly Roger in the One Piece world, and both of them are tied into the conflict between humans and Fishman. They are, of course, the Sun Pirates, who use the sun as their symbol, and the new Fishman Pirates, who use a modified version of the sun with a decapitated human inside. Now, the Sun Pirates certainly have an agenda that has to do with freedom, but their symbol was chosen more to cover up the mark of their slavery, so I can kind of give that one a pass. Likewise, the new Fishman Pirates were primarily concerned with the grudge between fishmen and humans, and not actually that concerned with risking their own lives, although they certainly did that through the drug they used to enhance their powers. I consider these two groups to be exceptions that prove the rule. They are pirates, and they are fine with risking their lives, but their symbol doesn't have to reflect it because they're fishmen. And I think that the implication is that fishmen understand they are risking their lives by becoming pirates because of the historic context they live in. We do meet pirates who have given up on the resolve to risk their lives, and the story of One Piece is never kind to them. Captain Kuro of the Black Cat Pirates? Not really a pirate. Luffy said so. He was not seeking to risk his life in pursuit of his dreams anymore, and that disqualified him. Likewise, Foxy of the Foxy Pirates and their whole Davy Back fight kind of avoids the risk of death, and they meet with a fairly ignominious end. They're not willing to risk their lives, so Luffy takes their Jolly Roger. The flag of piracy is stripped from them, and while Luffy does try to make up for that by painting his own Jolly Roger, even the future king of the pirates can't just dispense the title on people if they're not willing to actually live like pirates. And we see, by the time Luffy becomes an emperor of the sea, the Foxy Pirates have decayed to just 3 members adrift in a dinghy. Finally, on Sabaody Archipelago, we see perhaps the darkest incarnation of this idea. We see a captured pirate captain who has been enslaved, trying to run for freedom, begging people to help him just live long enough to get home, and instead he dies a very, very ignoble death when his exploding collar goes off in the middle of a street. Conversely, a pirate captain who is about to be auctioned off chooses to bite his own tongue, striking a last blow at the people who would have demeaned him. Of course, being willing to risk your life and getting freedom in return is not always a positive thing. Being free means being free. You can do anything, and pirates frequently do. The Jolly Roger is not just a memento mori for pirates. It's also memento mori for everyone else. And they frequently visit death and destruction on the people who get between them and what they want. Is it any wonder, then, that the normal people of the One Piece world look on pirates with such fear? Clearly, there is meaning to embracing the creed of the pirate and being willing to risk your life for freedom, just as there is meaning in embracing the creed of the Marine and seeking justice from on high. I would propose that pirates and the Marines are a lot more alike than most people give them credit for. The primary difference is one of scope rather than structure. Consider what we've seen in Whole Cake Island and Wano. Both of those places were essentially military dictatorships with a privileged ruling class enjoying the luxuries of a corrupt lifestyle while free to take whatever they want from the general populace everywhere else. Seen in Big Mom's devouring rampages across Whole Cake Isle and in the complete desolation of Wano by Kaido's military-industrial complex. With enough power and influence, either one of these pirates, or both together, as we saw at the end of Wano, could very easily replace the world government, and not a whole lot would change. There would be different faces and names, but the core nature of the world would remain the same. This is why those pirate emperors were ultimately defeated before they could cause the cycle of nations to complete. They fell into the same corrupt practices of the corrupt nation they live in, and so they were doomed, just like that nation is. On the other hand, Edward Newgate was a pirate who grew powerful enough to command fleets and command territory, but who was not corrupted by the environment he lived in. He treated his men well, and he seems to have been a very good patron to Fishman Island and all the other nations that flew his flag. His name warded away danger, and he did not make heavy-handed demands of them. The problem with Whitebeard is that he could not unify the pirates. Perhaps he was too old and stubborn, which seems most likely. Perhaps it was simply because he came from the Rocks Pirates, and he was at odds with the last of the 4 emperors, red-haired Shanks, who came from Rogers Pirates. Perhaps it was simply because he never claimed the One Piece and became king of the pirates himself. Whatever it was, he lacked the charisma or the power or the influence to bring the pirates together, and so the world government remains and it crushed Whitebeard, and the cycle of nations remains incomplete. All of which brings us back around to the beginning. The importance of the individual. And it's time for me to deliver what may be my hottest take on One Piece. I don't actually think it's a story about hard work, or friendship, or dreams, or freedom. I think at its core, One Piece is actually about leadership. Unlike most shonen protagonists, Luffy spends very little time as an understudy. In fact, he spends exactly 1 chapter that way. He is a kid who looks up to Shanks, and he studies the way of piracy from Shanks for 1 chapter. After that, he's done. In most shonen stories, the protagonist has a mentor figure of some sort for at least the first act of the overall narrative, usually the whole narrative. And while technically, yes, Shanks is still around, When Shanks and Luffy part ways at the end of Chapter 1, they are no longer a mentor and a pupil. Luffy has to become a great pirate. He has to be an equal to Shanks before they will meet again. And no, the end of Marineford does not count. Luffy was unconscious. My point is, from Chapter 2, Luffy has been a captain. Leading people has been a core part of his job description from the word go. And while yes, he's had to grow into that role, he was not a perfect captain at the beginning of the story, and he's not a perfect captain now. Being a leader has always been a part of the story. We look at a lot of different leaders over the course of One Piece, but the emphasis of the story has always been on having the right leader in the right place at the right time. Luffy, not Usopp, is the right captain for the Straw Hats. Cobra, not Crocodile, is the right leader for Alabasta. Riku, and not Doflamingo, is the right leader for Dressrosa. This general theme is echoed in other places as well. Jinbei, and not Arlong, is the right emissary for Fishman, just to cite one example. The story also examines the importance of recognizing bad leaders through stories like the Black Cat Pirates, and of course King Walpole, and of what happens when there's no leader. The two most notable examples of that being the ship that you see at the beginning of the Davy Back fight, and the world government itself, which effectively has a leader that hides. So you come back to this question, who is going to lead? Right now, the world government is a ship without a captain, or at least with a captain who does not want to fulfill his duties. He leaves them to his subordinates, just like Gecko Moria, and so, of course, the world looks a bit like a graveyard full of rotting corpses. And no, the parallels between Imu and Moria don't exactly bode well for the last arc of One Piece, but it's the last arc, so let's all just cross our fingers and hope it comes off well. I have a lot of faith in Oda. He's come a long way since Thriller Bark. Not what I'm here to talk about. The ship of state is adrift. Someone must take the helm. And who will it be? Well, we've been given two options since Chapter 2. That's right. It's a Luffy or Koby. Koby joined the Marines. He stands for the continuity of the old system, which is safe and reasonably trustworthy, with the risk of its becoming detached from its foundations. Luffy, on the other hand, became a pirate. He represents the potential of freedom and a new way of living with the risk of your life. One of these two must lead the world into the next age. And it's interesting, if you go back and look at the history of One Piece, these two things do actually seem to go hand in hand on a regular basis. After all, Freedom's avatar in the last generation was Gold D. Roger, and the avatar of stability and continuity was Monkey D. Garp. These two people never quite escaped each other either, at least until death took a hand. And if I may be allowed a bit of speculation, it may be that Imu and Joy Boy were also the avatars of these ideas in their era. We don't know very much about them yet, of course. We've only had 1,100 chapters. But if you go back and you look at it, whatever happened in the Void Century, the people who founded the world government and the people who left the Poneglyphs were closer together than you might think. After all, the Nefertaris are one of the founding families of the world government and the keepers of a Poneglyph. So ultimately, while you can call Marines a system and pirates a group of people, I think it's better to look at the Marines and the pirates as two different ways for the next leader to arise. I think that's actually the story that Oda wants to tell. He wants to draw this parallel that shows different ways for leaders to arise. And whether you are a fleet admiral or a pirate king, you have to be ready to confront the realities of what it means to live on the world stage. Some eras call for the stability and justice of the Marines, and some will eventually call on the freedom and the risk of a pirate. And if you're in the wrong era, well, maybe the most important thing to recognize is when to stand aside. After all, that's what Gold Roger saw. Now, I don't know any of this for sure. The story isn't over after all. But it is something I have been thinking about off and on, especially during interludes like Reverie or here at the end of Egghead Island. And I found Melon T's very excellent video a great source of inspiration to talk a little bit about my own thoughts. And who knows, Oda may still have a curveball to throw us here at the end. After all, there's a king of the land on the red line, and the men who would be king of the seas are hunting for the One Piece. Kind of makes me wonder what the king of the skies has been up to all this time. Divine intervention is really hard to take into account in the cycle of nations, after all. But that's just what I've been thinking about. Let me know what you've been thinking about down in the comments below. There's a like button and a subscribe button down there. You can use those as you see fit, and I'll talk to you later.